Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. What does the word always, or in Hebrew, tamid, mean? There are two services in the temple that are described in this week's Torah portion with the word that they should be performed tamid, always. One is the daily lamb in the morning and in the evening. That there should be the tamid shel shachrit and the tamid shel bein arbaim. The constant, daily offering of the lamb as a sacrifice in the morning and a lamb in the afternoon. But then we talk about the showbread. It was the lechem hapanim. It had 12 loaves of bread, and it had to be always on the table before God for the Kohanim to eat. And when the Torah describes how it was done, and Rashi explains it, when they would bring in the fresh loaves of bread on Friday, instead of taking off the old bread and putting on the new one, which would constitute a problem because it would not fulfill the obligation that it should be always on the table, they would slide in the new bread and slowly push off the old bread. So there was literally never a moment where the bread was not on the table. So it was always upon the table before God. And the question is, does tamid mean always literally or just regularly, like the daily offerings, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, always, every single day? And the answer is, as we know, that sometimes we use the word always in two different ways. So for example, if I say I'm always thinking, I mean literally, the mind never stops thinking. If I say my heart is always beating, it means literally my heart is constantly always beating. But sometimes you say something as a matter of principle. When I come home from work, I always say hello to my wife and children before I do anything else. It doesn't mean that I'm always doing it. It means I do it regularly. If I say, whenever someone asks me for charity, I always give charity. Or if I say, I always study Torah. I don't mean I study Torah constantly. I do other things. I go to work. I have many other responsibilities. But I always study Torah whenever I have free time. And so really the word always could be quantitatively or qualitatively. Quantitatively, it means regularly, constantly, always, without any interruption, literally every minute of every day of my life, like my heart beating. But then sometimes it's a qualitative statement. I always do this because this is my priority. This is my principle. I always go to my children's performances. It doesn't mean I do it every day. It may be once a week or once a month. But whenever there is a performance of my children, I leave work and go there because that's my priority, to be there for my family. So I always put that before anything else, and I'm present for my family, for my children. And this is a very powerful lesson in life. It's not about how often you do something, but how principled you are. How much of a priority it is for you. Because that defines your character. So much so that even when you're not doing it, it's as though you're doing it always, because that's your essence. That's who you really are. And even though you're not doing it at this moment because it's not necessary, it's not warranted constantly, but because every moment you would choose that, that means that that's who you really are, and it's as though you're always doing it. So if a person says, I'm always there for my family, no matter what, even when my family doesn't need me necessarily, or I'm doing other things, since that's my real priority, that's who I become every moment of my life. When we went to Israel last week, we dedicated a Torah in loving memory of Uri Danino. Uri Danino was at the Nova Festival. He had left with his car, got a call that people needed help from someone he met there, and he went back into the area to rescue Omer Shem Tov and Itai and Maya Regev. As they were, four of them were leaving, Hamas terrorists stopped the car, took them all into captivity. Tragically, Omer Danino was killed by the Hamas terrorists in captivity in June, and now, finally, after Maya and Itai Regev came home last year, Omer Shem Tov finally came home. And we learned about this great hero from Omer Shem Tov in the hospital. We decided to dedicate a Torah in his memory. But before we went back to the hospital the next evening to dedicate the Torah, we went to the grave of Uri Danino to tell him with his parents that we're going tonight to dedicate a Torah in his memory, fulfilling his wish, because he had told someone in captivity in the tunnels that when he gets out, he wants to dedicate a Torah. As we were talking at the grave of Uri Danino, praying, singing, putting the cover of the Torah on his tombstone, there was a woman at the grave of her son right next to us, and she was weeping. And we asked her, tell us about your son. And she told us that tragically, her son was fighting in Gaza and he committed suicide. He couldn't take the pain of watching his friends being killed, and he wrote them a letter apologizing, but he said, I can't deal with the pain anymore, and he took his life. And as she stood there crying, she said to us, I always worry about him. Is he finding peace in the next world? Because after all, he did something against God, against Judaism's, Torah's belief. You're not supposed to take your life. And I worried whether or not he would find rest in the next world. But now that I hear the story of his neighbor in the cemetery, Uri Danino, how he went back to rescue others and risked his life and ultimately gave his life to take others out of their distress and danger, I now finally have peace that my son's soul is at peace in the next world, because there's a reason he's buried alongside him. Because Uri's the type of person that doesn't leave others behind. He doesn't just think about himself. He rescues and takes a hold of others to bring them to freedom and safety. And therefore I know that Uri, who is a tzaddik, who is surely in the highest heights of heaven, will not abandon my son and let him remain behind. He will take a hold of him, grab him, and bring him with him to the holiest, loftiest levels in heaven. And it was such a moving experience, but it taught me something. You see, what Uri did with so much courage and bravery and sacrifice, to go back to the shooting terrorists, into the danger zone, to rescue others, defined who he is, his character, to the point that this mother said, I know that Uri is the person who would always save others, not just think about himself. Uri only did it once, but he did it with such soul, with such heart, with such sacrifice, that it defined who he was forever, that he's the type of person who would always do this. There are some things we get to do literally always. Others we get to do maybe once a day, once a week, once a month, maybe even once in a lifetime, like Uri Danino. But that one act could make such a resounding statement that I am the type of person who always would do this. You could always rely on me. You could always count on me. And that's what gave this mother comfort. May our priorities, may the things that define who we are, the things that people know we will always do, be all things that we are proud of, that are virtuous, that are good, that lend honor to who we are, and more goodness and kindness to those around us. Have a wonderful day.